Good afternoon. At this afternoon's Intelligence Forum's Who Are You podcast, we're very lucky to have Dr. Phil Considine, who's Executive Director of Education at the University of Strathclyde. That's quite a mouthful, isn't it? And we're very delighted to have him here today. Phil, first question I'd like to ask you is, would you share your professional journey so far?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. It's lovely to be here. Thanks a lot for the invite. Um, and yeah, so as you say, I look after exec education at the business school here at Strathclyde. Um, and I am my academic home, I guess, is the Hunter Centre for its enterprise strategy and innovation. So I've got a real interest in innovation and kind of entrepreneurship, as well as the more general exec ed. But I've been working at the kind of intersection of exec ed, entrepreneurship, boards and leadership development across the UK, Europe, or in the Middle East and the Far East as well. As well as my job here at Strathclyde, I'm also a member of the Financial Times Board and Director Development Faculty. So I do quite a lot of work with boards. But I think I've always been kind of fascinated by the question of why do some organizations manage to almost continually reinvent themselves and innovate while others struggle to? And I think it's kind of particularly noticeable in the kind of current context. But my journey, I mean, my career's taken me through a lot of different areas, through industry, consultancy. I worked in the oil industry, I worked in training and development, and I kind of then moved into an academic career. I was down in Henley-on-Thames, the management school there, in Nottingham, and eventually I've ended up in running the exec ed side at the business school at Strathclyde. And so today I work with business leaders, entrepreneurs, family businesses, everything from high growth SMEs to multinationals and public sector organizations in the UK and around the world, helping them to kind of navigate growth, understand digital transformation, governance, and innovation. So it's been brilliant. I mean, it's great working across all of these different sectors. But I guess kind of what excites me most isn't just the teaching or the delivery. It's kind of helping experienced leaders think differently and to ask better questions and build organizations that are capable of succeeding in an increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. So I think like a lot of people in exec ed, we kind of fall into it, having had a career that, whereas other colleagues who are kind of much more traditional academics will have finished their undergraduate degree, gone in, researched, etc., and have gone down a very kind of defined career path. Exec ed is great for anybody listening that's thinking either they or their children don't really know what they want to do. There's a fair chance they'll end up in an exec ed role.
I mean, you mentioned global challenges and general challenges. So what does good governance of a business look like?
Well, I think so. I think firstly, it's not about compliance. I think that so when we set up at Strathclyde, our Centre for Board and Director Development, our strapline was always beyond compliance, because I think that people thinking about good governance around compliance, I guess the equivalent that I always draw is that, well, it would be a little bit like suggesting being a good global citizen is simply about not breaking the law. That's not the case at all. It's about creating better decisions. It's about helping organizations develop strategic thinking, develop their values, understanding risk. So I think good governance really creates the conditions for consistently making better decisions. So it's not about committees and paperwork and regulation. It's about organizational culture, it's about values, and it's about understanding some of the aspects like risk, etc. But it's a far more, I think it's far more about soft skills than about rules and regulations. I often, when I'm talking about this, particularly with our MBA or exec ed students, the metaphor that I always use, or the example I always use is, and people of a certain age will probably remember going back many years ago when we were talking about motivation theory, and we had hygiene factors and motivators. And so we don't really talk about this anymore because it's kind of a little bit dated now. But the hygiene factors were the things that the absence of which would demotivate people. So if you're not getting enough pay, you're naturally demotivated because you're worried about money. Once you solve that, once you get them in place, that then doesn't actually motivate you. What motivates you is the work that you're doing, the esteem that you're held in by your friends and family. And I think from a governance perspective, I always draw the parallel that says, well, you kind of do need the systems and processes in place and the compliance part in place, but that's your hygiene factors. That does not in and of itself create good governance. That's your motivators that do that. It's the organizational culture, it's the way that values are enacted within the organization. And I think that what governance isn't about bureaucracy. It's about disciplined decision making and people knowing and understanding what they're trying to achieve and how they're trying to achieve it. And kind of what the organization's values are.
Can you share your thoughts on socially responsible strategies?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of the whole concept of social responsibility has changed and evolved significantly. I think going back, so I remember when I did my PhD thesis, it was looking at how organizations applied and benefited from being socially responsible. So it was about the kind of intersection of facts, beliefs, values that social responsibility was. And we talked about corporate social responsibility then. I think, if I think back to 20 years ago, though, it kind of often meant philanthropy. And I think today it's much more closely linked to long-term competitiveness or effectiveness, and for organizations to be able to think much longer term, and also to link it to the resources that they have and how they use it. And so we often talk, and we'll kind of talk a bit more about this, I'm sure, about ESG, and that's been kind of quite heavily politicized over the course of the last couple of years. But I think that we're seeing organizations kind of putting the F into ESG as well, and understanding that ESG is still a really positive force for good, but you have to link it to the finances as well. So I think organizations that generally understand their impact on employees, customers, suppliers, and broader communities tend to be more resilient, tend to attract better talent, and they tend to build stronger brands. I think that there's an important word that in part of the conversation is genuine. And stakeholders are increasingly good at spotting superficial initiatives, understanding where there's greenwashing happening. And we're now seeing examples of green hushing as well, where organizations are putting down their green credentials for reasons that we've just seen a change in mindset, a lot of it coming I mean, some of it's been driven by the administration in the US, but actually, I think you get a natural evolution of thinking in these things. And perhaps at one point it goes a little bit too far one way, and you get pushback to bring it back a little bit more to the centre. But I think when we're talking about social responsibility, I think it certainly works best when it's embedded in strategy rather than sitting alongside it as some kind of add-on. And I think I would argue actually that purpose without performance isn't sustainable, but performance without purpose is increasingly becoming unsustainable as well. So when you get that both of them working together, then it can be a really powerful force for good.
So you meet and have met a lot of entrepreneurs, and in your experience, what are the ingredients that make these people tick and succeed?
So it's a really interesting one. I mean, as I say, my academic home is Hunter Centre, and our entire focus has been on entrepreneurship, but we're now realizing that actually there's the perception that an entrepreneur can only be someone that sets up and runs a successful business, I think is one that I don't agree with. I think that everybody has the capacity to act in an entrepreneurial way, and that's regardless of the sector or the size of the organization that they work in. And again, there's a stereotype that entrepreneurs are great risk takers, and I'm not sure that they all are. I mean, I think that the best entrepreneurs are great risk managers, but they're not always necessarily great risk takers. They take risk that is calculated, and they take risks that they believe that they will be able to manage. So I think that risk managers more than risk takers, but the ones that we work with, and we do work with some brilliant entrepreneurs in the business school and on the programs that I do with the Financial Times, they seem to be curious. They seem to be able to learn quickly, and they constantly adapt. They've got really good resilience because setbacks are inevitable. But you can kind of see that those, I don't know if it's traits of the word, but the kind of capabilities that they have are, so when you're talking about resilience or judgment and adaptability and their ability to build relationships, that is not unique to startups or to high growth SMEs. That's every bit as relevant, whether you're working in the National Health Service or you're working in big pharma or you're working in local government. And all of these capabilities and traits, I think, suggest that entrepreneurial thinking within every organization is kind of really important. And one of the things that I have noticed with the successful entrepreneurs that we work with is that they have a really strong ability to listen, learn, and to change. They will talk about their ability to pivot, and I think that that's a really important one.
I mean, that word listening is a powerful word, isn't it?
Yeah, not 100%.
So another thought on that before we move to the next question. I did read somewhere that Napoleon was recommended a great strategist of a general, and he was given all the reasons why this general should be put on his staff. And Napoleon asked one question: yes, but is he lucky? So maybe a dab of luck is required in the game as well.
I won't mention the company, but one of the programs we run is with high growth SMEs, and it is with ones that are kind of heading towards Series A funding. So I'm looking for quite significant bits of money. And what we do is, part of what we do is we bring in speakers from that have been through the mill with it, and that have either exited or are still with the business. And one of the ones that we had in, he had been the chief exec of a business that had grown, had done exceptionally well, and they sold it eventually to a US corporate that bought it. And he was telling the group that they sold the business. The first business that he'd sold was done in 2007, just before the global financial crisis. And that's exactly what he said to the class. And so the thing that I learned from that is it's far better to be lucky than it is to be good. I said if we'd held on to it for another 6 months, we wouldn't have achieved anything like the valuation that we got. And he said that it is not as if we had any foresight or insight into the impending global financial crisis, that we just got lucky.
So would you share your thoughts on ESG reporting?
Yeah, I mean, so this is kind of takes up quite a significant part of my day, because I've been involved with working with boards and working with a lot of students as well, or MBAs, on ESG. And I think the reporting has matured significantly. There's a real conundrum with it. So there's a period, I think, where organizations focus heavily on the reporting itself, and there's an entire industry that has spun out from it. The number of consultancies, the number of advisors, not to mention the ratings agencies, and people that are setting standards. So one of we used to use Refinitiv, which was one of the kind of standards agencies. It's now been bought, now part of somebody else now, I can't quite remember who. But they had literally, I think it was something like they had 130 something measures for environmental impact, 140 measures for social impact, the same number for kind of governance, and it had become such a complex exercise that I think a lot of organizations began to question what the value of it was. And I think increasingly investors and regulators as well are looking for less box ticking and more evidence that ESG issues are genuinely integrated into strategy and risk management, rather than it being a standalone 200-page report that they're producing. So I think that there has been, and it's one of the factors that I think where we've seen that kind of pushback from the kind of public in general. I was talking to an investor the other day who was saying that 2 years ago they were really, really focused on the environmental impact reports that were coming out, whereas now they're actually much more focused on the governance side of things. Their feeling is that environmental impact is potentially becoming less of a driver for them. They need to know that organizations are understand the fact that climate change absolutely has to be integrated into what they're doing, and the number of organizations that actually are massively impacted by it is huge. But the report itself isn't really the objective. What they're looking for, and what they're looking to see, is that better decisions are being made because of the data that's been collected through the ESG reporting process that organizations are going through. So the actual report itself isn't perhaps as important as it was in the past, whereas the data and the information that organizations are are collecting for that is now being kind of integrated into decision making, strategy, etc., etc. So I think that there is a bit of a shift, and that organizations are now kind of using their ESG reporting and initiatives to understand long-term value creation rather than it being an administrative exercise. And I think that's a really positive shift.
I mean, as a continuation of the word ESG reporting, perhaps this is correlated, the importance of the word values within a business and the business establishing what its values are. Could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of the big challenges, I think, when it comes to values is that I think people are very aware of the fact that we have seen lots and lots of instances where there's a significant gap between espoused and enacted values. And you know, it's easy to talk about, I don't know, integrity, say, when everything's going well. Or the one that we quite often talk about in some of the projects and programs that we run, where you'll find an organization who will say part of their values are our people are our greatest assets, or we're people focused, and then they make 35% of them redundant, and you think, well, clearly they weren't. So you can see a difference there between espoused and enacted values. So I think that the best organizations don't, or they might have values framed on reception walls, but actually that's not the issue. The issue there is that they have leaders who live and demonstrate them consistently through their decisions that they make. I think people don't necessarily believe what organizations say they value. They believe what organizations repeatedly do, how they act, what do they reward. And I think you can kind of see when values become much more meaningful when organizations are going to make a choice between short-term gain, long-term trust. Are they willing to sacrifice some profitability or short-term financial gain for long-term benefit? And you know, I think, I guess in my experience, I would suggest that organizational culture is really just values being translated into everyday behaviors within the organization. So I think that the key bit for me when we talk about values is that difference between espoused and enacted values. There must be fully aligned.
I mean, your focus at the Hunter School for Entrepreneurship, Strategy and Innovation at the University of Strathclyde, you have a focus in the business department, the business area. Tell me a little bit about the broader University of Strathclyde.
Sure. I mean, so the university, we've been here for a long time. We were founded in 1796, I think it was, by a guy called John Anderson. And he set up the university as a place of useful learning. And I think that phrase is just as relevant today as it was kind of over 200 years ago. The reason I like working at Strathclyde is that I think we combine a really strong academic rigor, but with practical impact. So we work closely with business, governments, entrepreneurs, and public sector to solve real world challenges rather than simply kind of discussing theory. We're very much about applied learning. We also have a very strong international reach. We've got campuses and centres throughout the Middle East and in the Far East in Malaysia. So, which is great because it means that we get to interact with and work with organisations across the globe. But we also work across Europe as well, where we've just finished a large project. I finished one a couple of weeks ago with a Swiss-US pharma. And so we're getting to work with multinationals, with scaling SMEs, and our goal is always the same. We're looking to help leaders create organizations that deliver lasting values. So lasting value, sorry. So I think for me, Strathclyde's not just a university, it's more of a kind of community that believes that knowledge should and must make a practical difference, particularly as we work across, we've got a really good cross-university ethos where I work very closely with colleagues from science, from engineering, from our humanities, from psychology. And I think currently that's massively important because I think the pace of change isn't slowing. I mean, we kind of see the impact that AI is having. And I think kind of leaders in organizations in any sector no longer have the luxury of waiting for certainty. They're having to make decisions based on a world that is volatile. I mean, we talk about VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. They're making decisions based on having access to imperfect information and also information that is often historical in a world that is changing so quickly. I think the organizations that we're working with that we see thriving are the ones that combine strong values, really good governance, kind of that curiosity and the confidence to keep learning. And in many ways, that's what Strathclyde was set up to do. That's our history, that's in our DNA. It's about building organizations that can continually adapt while staying true to their purpose and making sure that they've got clear strategies, they're making sure that they're delivering and that they're creating value, and value not just for shareholders, which, don't get me wrong, it's the basis in which a lot of our organizations and our markets operate, but for the wider communities that they serve and for their employees as well. And I think that's kind of in Strathclyde's DNA, which is why I find that a great place to work. It's it's like everywhere, it's got its challenges, but that idea that we are trying to work across all of the schools to help organizations make better decisions, to create long-term value, and to put in a kind of AI-driven, uncertain world. I think the greatest competitive advantage is an organization's ability to learn faster than its competitors, and for us to be able to kind of help inform that and to facilitate that within organizations is wonderful.
So the last question I'd like to put to you, and I do appreciate we've only got a minute or two, and we probably need a day or two, so you're going to be a miracle worker to answer it. And that is, the word UK growth is used continually at the moment for obviously good reasons. What is your perspective on how that might be achieved in the miraculous 1.5 minutes you have to reply to the question?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very simple question. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we were discussing this recently, and the new Prime Minister's come in and talking about what his plans are. We've already seen some quite sensible help that's been given. However, all of the funding proposals and plans are premised on growth. I mean, if you go back to the 1990s, when the economy was growing at 2.5% year on year, what it does is it gives government a lot of choices that they can make because they've got significant money coming through. Now, I know that we are part of a global ecosystem. So things like, I don't know, at a very basic level, the price of a barrel of oil is not something we've got any control over. However, I mean, I think that to help with growth, we've really got to increase business investment. I mean, I think that at its heart is where we need to go. But I think there are challenges as well around planning and infrastructure. There are challenges around workforce skills. So people are really worried just now about the impact that AI is going to have on workload. The World Economic Foundation had put out a report that suggests that, yes, it will take some jobs away, but there'll be a net gain of something in the region of 70 million jobs. Now, what that means is that we have to upskill our workforce. So I think there's a real challenge there. And I would support scale-ups rather than kind of just startups. So we really need to get our businesses scaling up. And AI has got to be a national productivity program. We've got an opportunity just now. So the UK, we lead in so many aspects of AI, and yet we don't really seem to be able to monetize it yet. So I think that we really need to be looking at how do we invest in scale-ups to help them to monetize, so that the next unicorn that's coming is in the UK, and it's not coming out of Silicon Valley, it's coming out of Silicon Fen around Cambridgeshire, or even better, if it's coming out of Silicon Glen, as we used to refer to it in Scotland. But it's about creating that infrastructure. It's about, I think, regulatory compliance. We need to reduce that a bit as well. But it's really about investing in those areas that there is scope for growth.
Well, Phil Considine, thank you so much indeed for giving up your time for this Intelligence Forum's Who Are You podcast. And I look forward to, no doubt, speaking to you in due course. Thank you.
Pleasure, Harry. Thanks very much.